For over a decade, Epic Games treated Linux like a ghost town, a platform too small, too fragmented, and too insecure to justify a native storefront. Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games, publicly dismissed the platform as an ideological escape hatch rather than a viable business target. But then came an official community question and answer on the Epic Games Store Discord. An Epic staff member known as 1% Nachos dropped a bomb in a casual response. A native Epic Games Store client for Linux is currently in active development and is slated to arrive soon. While it will miss the upcoming Epic Games Store preview update because it requires deep structural engineering rather than a simple wrapper, the reality is unmistakable. Epic Games has officially raised the white flag. Soon, but not for the preview release. As you can imagine, we need to do more than simply have a build of the launcher that can run natively on Linux. Epic didn't build this launcher out of goodwill for open source gaming. They were forced to build it because Valve played over a 10-year game of 3D chess and won. By pushing Linux past critical mass with SteamOS and the Steam Deck, Valve forced Epic into a corner where ignoring Linux meant surrendering the future of PCs entirely. To understand how dramatic this surrender is from Epic, you have to look back at the past decade of Epic's statements regarding Linux. Because the thing is, Epic wasn't always hostile. Back in the mid-1990s and early 2000s, Epic Vice President Mark Rain actively praised Linux porting houses like Loki Software for bringing titles like Unreal Tournament to the platform. In 2014, when Unreal Engine 4 shipped, Epic enthusiastically stated, "Folks have been asking about our early Linux efforts and support for Valve SteamOS and Steam machines. We have good news for you. We love Linux." This may sound crazy today, and that's because this was for Valve's original Steam machine, before the Epic Games Store launched. However, as soon as Valve launched SteamOS and Epic launched its own digital storefront in 2018, that love vanished. When a former director of publishing strategy at Epic was asked if a native Linux Epic Games Store client was coming, his response was flat. It really isn't on the roadmap right now. Tim Sweeney said something similar by not giving any commitments. We'll see. Then came the infamous 2018 tweet that defined Epic's stance for years. When discussing Linux as an alternative to Windows, Tim said, "Installing Linux is sort of the equivalent of moving to Canada when one doesn't like US political trends. Nope, we've got to fight for the freedoms we have today, where we have them today." So to Tim Sweeney and Epic Games, Linux just wasn't a platform to invest in. When the Steam Deck launched in 2022, the hypocrisy only got worse. Gamers were begging Epic to bring Fortnite to Linux with Valve's Proton compatibility layer, but Tim refused, citing kernel security and anti-cheat risks. "We don't have confidence that we'd be able to combat cheating at scale under a wide array of kernel configurations, including custom ones." When asked why Epic wouldn't simply support official SteamOS kernel versions, Sweeney doubled down, adding that subdividing an already small market made it commercially unviable. Even as late as December 2023, Sweeney reiterated that Linux wasn't worth Epic's engineering resources unless Valve managed to hit tens of millions of users. Yet, behind the scenes, a different reality was taking place.
So then in this February this year, we shipped a Steam client for Linux. And as much as anything, that was a signal to our development partners that we really were serious about this Linux thing that we were talking with them about. And now today we have 198, at least when I got on the plane, we had 198 games that were running on Linux.
Today, that number is just under 30,000 games. While Epic spent years generating excuses, Valve was quietly building a massive ecosystem. Gabe Newell saw this coming back in 2012 when Microsoft launched Windows 8. Gaben recognized the threat of a closed Windows App Store and declared Linux the future of open gaming. The big problem that is holding back Linux is games. People don't realize how critical games are in driving consumer purchase purchasing behavior. We want to make it as easy as possible for the games on Steam to run on Linux as well. So Valve over time didn't ask developers to write expensive native Linux ports. Instead, they built Proton, a compatibility layer built on top of Wine. Valve worked directly with open source maintainers and anti-cheat vendors like Easy Anti-Cheat, which Epic ironically owns, and BattleEye to make Windows builds run flawlessly on Linux with just simple clicks. Skeptics and lifetime Windows users frequently dismiss Linux gaming's growth numbers, claiming Steam hardware survey spikes and stat counters are manufactured by bots to make the platform look more popular than it is. However, the reality on the ground disproves this narrative entirely. Valve expanded SteamOS support to third-party handhelds like the ROG Ally and recent Lenovo Legions, and is also actively collaborating with Nvidia on official driver support so that Nvidia GPUs in the future can run SteamOS properly on desktops and handhelds, which will lead to even more people using the platform. GOG has also officially announced a native GOG Galaxy client for Linux. Linux usage on Steam has been on a long-term upward trajectory for the past few years, with a clear catalyst being the original Steam Deck release, which showed people what is truly possible on Linux. Bots don't buy these handhelds, nor do they force multi-billion-dollar corporations like GOG, Epic, and Nvidia to assign engineering teams to write native software or improve native support. Linux gaming reached a tipping point where market share generated its own momentum, and now it's just snowballing and will only get larger. Seeing as Epic abandoned Linux users for years, the open source community solved the problem themselves. Developers created Heroic Games Launcher, a lightweight open source interface that manages Epic, GOG, and Amazon game libraries on Linux, macOS, and Windows. Many users consider it superior to the official Epic Game Store client on Windows. For Epic, launching a native client isn't just a guaranteed win. If Epic ships a store worse than Heroic, Linux users will just simply ignore it. This ties into Epic's broader storefront update strategy. Epic realized that giving away free games wasn't enough to build long-term platform loyalty. Steam users stay on Steam due to the sunk cost fallacy, years of collected achievements, cloud save, friends list, and just much more. To compete, Epic needs a fast, feature-rich launcher, which is their plan for their upcoming preview update of the store, which won't include the Linux side just yet. So if their new Linux app fails to meet the standards Linux gamers are used to, tools like Heroic will stay to be the preferred option. And while a native storefront client is an important step forward, the elephant in the room remains anti-cheat. Epic owns the Easy Anti-Cheat, and in 2021, Valve worked directly with Epic's EAC team to bring full Proton and Wine compatibility, specifically so games could run on the upcoming Steam Deck and desktop Linux. This led into Epic's September 2021 announcement that developers could enable Linux and Proton support for Epic Anti-Cheat with a simple toggle in the Epic Online Services portal. This is why nowadays you see some games which use the Easy Anti-Cheat as playable on Linux devices. Valve later confirmed the work in January 2022, stating their team had spent months making the process as straightforward as possible for developers. Yet, despite this joint effort that unlocked the Easy Anti-Cheat for hundreds of third-party games on Steam Deck and Linux, Epic refused to enable it for its own flagship title, Fortnite. What made this policy even more frustrating for gamers was just how simple it was. Valve didn't just ask Epic for anti-cheat support, they had engineers help build it, and Epic still chose to keep Fortnite locked out of the Linux ecosystem. But this may be changing as recent signals suggest Epic's posture is changing under market pressure. In June 2026, Epic posted an engineering job listing specifically seeking a senior game security engineer to champion Linux anti-cheat compatibilities for Epic. The posting required deep expertise in Linux OS internals and anti-cheat implementations. This role points towards dedicated Linux security work beyond just the basic Proton toggles that are already there. If Epic's upcoming native Linux client arrives alongside a native Linux anti-cheat solution, it could finally clear the path for Fortnite on SteamOS and Linux. A decade ago, Tim Sweeney mocked Linux as an impractical escape hatch, claiming the market was too small to care about. Today, Epic is spending engineering hours building a native Linux Epic Game Store client, hiring Linux security engineers, and playing catch-up to community-developed launchers like Heroic. Valve took the slow, difficult path of building open infrastructure through Proton, Vulkan, and SteamOS, plus even upcoming ones like Fex, which will be used for ARM devices. By making Linux gaming seamless for millions of players, Valve forced the rest of the industry to adapt. Epic's native Linux launcher isn't a gift to the Linux community, it's just Epic admitting reality. When even your most vocal critic is forced to support your platform, the platform has officially won. So for all your Steam and Linux related gaming news, make sure you subscribe.